Sometimes a story is just a story, but more often than not, they are a lesson cloaked in entertainment. The stories I share here are definitely the latter. Some are fact, some are fiction, all are beneficial. Hello, my name is Earl Breon, and you are listening to the Leadership Chronicles. Today's story will be about the Kranz Dictum. The date is January 27, 1967. 3 astronauts sat inside the command service module meant for the Apollo 1 mission. As Virgil Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee run through their routine training checklist, disaster strikes. A faulty wire causes a spark, and when this spark contacts the oxygen-enriched air being pumped into the cabin, an inferno ignites. Thanks in part to the pressure differences, the crews were unable to open the hatch in time, and all 3 souls were lost. Now, this was a critical time for NASA. It was 5 years after President Kennedy had given his famous speech at Rice University, giving NASA a deadline to reach the moon by the end of the decade.
Why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
And it was nearly 2 years before that goal would be met.
4 forward, drift into the right a little. 1.5. 30 seconds. Forward, just. Ready? Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
So NASA was under a lot of scrutiny at this point. And you could imagine that failures of any type would lead to multiple investigations, much less a failure that led to the loss of 3 highly trained astronauts. You see, after the accident, NASA began investigating, Congress began investigating, all of the individual contractors began investigating. Anyone with an interest in the space program was investigating. Now, what's important to remember for the rest of this story is that the accident happened on a Friday. Monday morning, Gene Kranz handled the situation like only a leader can. He gathered his team, and he gave a speech that would later become known as the Kranz Dictum. The best part about this speech is that Gene did it before any of these investigations could really get going, definitely before any findings could be made, and he did it without anyone prompting him to. It was an instinctual aspect of his leadership. So what did Gene say in this speech to his team? Well, here it is in his words.
Spaceflight's terribly unforgiving of carelessness, incapacity, or neglect. I don't know what the Thompson Committee will find as the cause of this accident, but I know what I find. We were the cause. The simulators weren't ready. Our software and mission control didn't function. Procedures weren't complete. Nothing we did had any shelf life. And no one stood up and said, "Damn it, stop." Now, from this day forward, mission control will be known by 2 words: tough and competent. Tough meaning we will never again shirk from our responsibility, because we're forever accountable for what we do or what we fail to do. Competent. We'll never again take anything for granted. We'll never stop learning. When you leave here today, you will write these two words, tough and competent, on your blackboard, and they will never be erased. They will serve as a constant reminder to the sacrifice of Grissom, White, and Chaffee. That's all.
Now, one of the reasons why this speech was so powerful is the first thing he did was take ownership for himself and for the team as being the cause of this accident. Not that anybody necessarily nicked the wire, but by getting lazy, by getting complacent, by resting on past successes, they let this happen. And Gene wasn't going to let anyone off the hook, including himself. Now, the other piece of this is not once did he throw anyone under the bus. They owned it as a team. He was to blame. Every single member of the team was to blame for this incident. He doesn't say you were the cause. He said we were the cause. Using this we and us type language is the language of successful leaders. Me and I promotes individualism. We and us promotes teams. Now, make no mistakes about it. Gene could have easily tossed any one of these young engineers under the bus. He was Mr. NASA at this time, after all. The next thing he did is he reminded them of the obligation they had to speak up if things were going wrong. Staying silent never really was an option, and it definitely was not going to be an option going forward. Next, by fully owning the situation, he removed all of the dread of waiting on these investigations to start and come to their conclusions. He was able to take that fear away from himself and his team and get them back on track to meet that deadline that the president had set for the program. If he had waited for somebody else to come through, waited for these investigations to come to fruition, then his team would have been stuck in this environment of fear. Gene removed that and got them back on track. Then he reinforced the expectations and standards that NASA had all along, but would return back to after this accident. He acknowledged again that collectively they had gotten careless. He reminded them that they were building a legacy here, and that everything they did needed to have a shelf life because it would be looked back on through the lens of history for future projects and just for general posterity. Everything they did was going to have a shelf life. So this means that as a team, every individual on the team needed to take ultimate pride in everything that they did. Finally, he gave them a nice, brief, succinct course of action to carry them forward. Tough and competent were going to be the two words that would measure every member of NASA from that day forward. Not just Gene and his team, but NASA as an organization. So obviously this approach worked fairly well for Gene. We know that he had a nice, long, successful career with NASA. He was there for many of the disasters that they faced. You know, if you've ever seen or read about Apollo 13, you know that he was instrumental in helping return those astronauts home. We're not going to talk about that incident much in this podcast. We'll probably touch on it in future episodes. But the point is, not only is this a good approach, it's effective, and it cements a leadership legacy. If Gene had never given this speech and never rallied his team, who knows where NASA would be, and who knows if we would even know the name Gene Kranz at this point. So what I want to do now is give you a few growth questions. Managers and leaders, do you have the courage to get in front of personal and team failures the way Gene did? If not, why not? Aspiring leaders and managers, how much would it mean for you to see your current leaders and managers set this type of example in times of crisis and failure? Wouldn't you rather be in a position of ownership and power than one of dread and waiting for others to decide your fate? What other takeaways did you personally get from this story? Well, there you have it, folks. There are your growth questions and the story of the Kranz Dictum and why it is an important leadership lesson for you to know. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leadership Chronicles. To continue the discussion, find me on Twitter at Earl_Breon, Facebook at facebook.com/layman leadership, all one word, or email me at podcast@earlbreon.com.